So today we're continuing in our series on the 3 I's of EQ: identify, illustrate, and implement. So what we're looking at is we're looking at part 4, where we're talking about social awareness. Now, in the first part, we talked about the 5 different parts of the EQ assessment that we utilize. It's based on Daniel Goleman's model. We talk about self-awareness and self-regulation, which follow right along with his book on social awareness on emotional intelligence and working with emotional intelligence. Now, saying that, there's one aspect of the assessment that we use that's a little bit different than Dr. Goleman, and that is it looks at internal motivation, intrinsic motivation. We talked about that last time. They're building blocks in each other. You have to have a good level of self-awareness to be able to be aware and be self-regulatory. Can't fix something if you don't know it's a problem. That self-awareness and regulation helps maintain a high level of internal motivation. And then motivation is really the key to look at social awareness and social regulation, which will be our next 2 episodes. So today we're talking about social awareness. And one of the things that from more of a, before I get into a formal definition, so to speak, of social awareness, I really want to step back and look at, as we go from the self part to the others part of emotional intelligence. And this is the part that Daniel Goleman talks about, empathy. He calls it empathy. We use it on this assessment tool, call it, social awareness. And so that's, if we use the terms interchangeably, you'll know what we're talking about. But with social awareness, making that leap from being self to others, I really wanted to hit on what EQ really does and what it is. If you look at it, I mean, obviously it's a kind of a foundational quality. It's extraordinarily important. Research finds in upper level managers and executives, and not just executives, but high performers. 90% of the difference between the people with same skills, but one's a high performer, one's not, ends up being emotional intelligence. But this really struck me when I looked at it, Tom, and it really looked at that EQ looks at a person's, obviously it's emotional intelligence, but it's the ability to sense, to understand, and to effectively apply the power and acumen of emotions to facilitate higher levels of collaboration and productivity. So when you look at people are like, okay, emotional intelligence, gee whiz, so what? Who cares? That's the gee whiz, so what? Who cares? The higher levels of EQ lead to that higher level of collaboration, higher level of productivity, and that produces bottom line results in an organization. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And Dave, when it comes down to, we're talking about empathy. How well does that person read other people and sense where they're at? And can you meet them where they're at? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about here today when it comes to social awareness. But the key is you have to understand yourself first. That's why we covered the first 3 parts. And now we're getting into something that is going to really make a difference for our leaders, because you're going to be able to relate to their people better. And as a result, improve that type of a business relationship with their team.
Yes. And as we go through this, I would challenge the listeners to think of some examples in their workplace and their work experience where you're like, oh, yeah, that would have been helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Tie this back to something that they've done. So as we've talked about a formal definition, so to speak, and what we mean by social awareness, just to put it into a contextual framework, just the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and your actions affect others, which is very important because you want to be aware of your own emotions, be able to regulate those. And then now I'm kind of, well, how does what I say and what I do affect others? But really, when you look about social awareness, the big thing with that is, I look at it as that's just your ability to read the room.